So we're going to build a Quinzee today, and we're going to talk a little bit about Quinzee as a survival shelter. First thing to build a Quinzee is you need to have tools. And you don't always have tools in a survival situation. So we have 2 shovels, and we also need a metal digging shovel. If not, then you're going to be doing it all by hand, which is going to be practically impossible. So what's a little bit different about a Quinzee is it's a southern version of an igloo. An igloo requires very crusty, hard snow that you can cut out with a knife. This kind of shelter requires powdery snow, which is a lot more common in southern climates where we don't get that big buildup of crust. So right back here we have a nice, relatively sheltered spot. First step is to make a gigantic pile, so we're going to get to work on that right now. Turns out that I was building Quinzees well before I knew they had a proper name. As a kid, we often built caves and tunnels when the snowplow would pile it high enough that we could work a metal spade and create tunnels wide enough to barely squeeze our bodies through. Pushing our abilities often got us into some tight spaces, and our resolve to work deep into crevices tested our claustrophobia. When snow wasn't pressed and compacted tightly by snowplow, my brother and I found an alternative. With shovels, we piled powdery snow high into a mound, as high as we had the energy, often well over our heads. At first we found that the snow was soft, but by moving the snow around and letting it settle, the mound began to harden into something that could be hollowed out. I later learned the word for the hardening process: sintering. This happens in just a small amount of time, around 1 hour. The longer you leave it though, the more sintering occurs, making the structure harder. Sintering is the process by which crystals in the snow bond. When snow is moved, the pointy structures in the snow crystals are destroyed. This may happen naturally due to wind or with the help of a shovel. With added pressure, the snow rebonds to nearby crystals, forming even larger crystals. This can be done by crushing or packing the snow or piling it, as is done during the construction of the Quinzee. As kids, we never had any idea what was happening scientifically, but we understood through trial and error what worked and what didn't in order to get one of these things built. What is special about a Quinzee is that they can be built with powdery snow that is not suitable for building an igloo. In fact, powdery snow is ideal for making these types of structures. First of all, a Quinzee is a lot of work. The first step is the easy part. Simply pile snow as high as you desire. Keep in mind when piling that you will lose interior space due to the required thickness of the outer walls, so this should be considered. The walls take up anywhere from 10 to 24 inches, depending on how strong you wish the structure to be. So that's it's getting there. You can see it's shorter than I am, and if you want to lay in it, you gotta assume that you're gonna be all the way across. A mound that is 8 to 10 feet in diameter and at least as tall as you is a good place to start, but there is no limit to how big you can build these. Once you have the snow high enough, wait a couple of hours for it to sinter before digging. The next step is basically to tunnel. We're going to tunnel everything out, and that's going to make a hollow interior. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but now you need to switch to your digging tool. So a nice metal shovel works. You can use your other shovel, but it's a little bit tricky when you're trying to hollow the inside. And this little shovel that my son has works really well too. And it helps to have a small person who can fit in the hole and dig out. Hollowing out the structure is the most time-consuming and energy-intensive part of the whole affair, and it will leave you hot, sweaty, and your clothing damp from crawling around in the snow. Some builders recommend that you insert sticks into the ceiling from the outside to keep the wall structure consistent and not dig out too much snow. I have never done so. I have found that being careful and stopping when light begins to show through the snow is sufficient. The Quinzee as a survival shelter is questionable since tools are needed to build it, which are unlikely to be available. While not impossible to build without a shovel, such as by hand, The difficulty in building one without proper tools would outweigh the benefits by a long shot. Even with modern tools, you will get your clothing wet by working with the snow, and you will burn many calories, more than you may save in the long run. Piling the snow might take 30 minutes if sufficient snow is present, but hollowing it out could take 1 to 3 hours depending on how fast you work. That's a significant cost. An alternative to a Quinzee is a snow cave. This just means digging out a tunnel in a mound of snow formed naturally, such as the side of a hill or a snowdrift. Even these types of caves can take 3 to 4 hours to complete. A final option, which is least expensive in terms of time and energy invested, is a snow trench. This is just a hollowed pit big enough to lie in, covered with branches, with more snow piled on top to form a roof. I must offer a few words of caution about any snow structure, especially a Quinzee. These can be made nearly airtight, which may seem like a good idea when trying to conserve heat, but this can lead to suffocation. The door of any snow shelter should never be sealed completely, and a sizable air vent, one that cannot be easily plugged by snow or debris, should be made at the top in order to let air circulate. Burning a fire or candles inside the Quinzee is not advised, as oxygen levels can be quickly compromised. To make the structure habitable, plastic should be made on top of the cold ground, and then on top of that there should be a blanket made of wool or open sleeping bag. Then either add more blankets, or a piece of foam, or air sleeping mat, followed by another good winter sleeping bag. If possible, a bed can be raised above the ground to let cold air sink while the occupant can take advantage of rising heat. A Quinzee is good for sheltering from the wind, and the temperature can be raised to the point of freezing, sometimes even higher. This can unfortunately lead to the interior walls melting and dripping. One big drawback is that one cannot usually stand in the structure unless it is made sufficiently high. Also, since the walls are made of snow, they will invariably drain the body of its heat. The air inside the Quinzee will also rise in humidity just through breathing and sweating. Over time, and as heat is added, the walls will ice and prevent moisture from escaping, making it even more important to encourage airflow through venting so as to avoid suffocation. A layer of ice should be scraped off the ceiling each day to allow the walls to breathe. If temperatures above the freezing point are expected, one should be careful as rain can easily damage the integrity of the structure, causing collapse. The Quinzee is poorly suited to warm climates for this reason. I have endured several nights in a Quinzee to negative 25 degrees Celsius, so despite their many drawbacks, they are a viable structure. If nothing else, the Quinzee is a fun backyard project, and kids really do enjoy playing around in them and building them. I would personally, however, not recommend a Quinzee as a survival shelter, as they are energy expensive and it will make your clothing wet through working in the snow and through sweating. When it comes to winter camping or winter survival, a snow trench or basic lean-to is sufficient, or if convenient, a simple tarp shelter will suffice. Making the pile was the easy part. Digging it out's the hard part. We're the same height now? Alright, we're done. We're tired. You tired? Was it a lot of work? Are you wet? Sweaty?
Kind of. I'm kind of wet, but not sweaty.
I'm sweaty. Really sweaty. A Quinzee is not a survival shelter. You'll get way too hot, way too sweaty. It's like a couple hours of work to dig it out. To make the pile took practically no time at all, but to dig it out was way too much investment. So it's not worth it. There are easier shelters. Just a trench would be fine with a tarp over top if you had one, or something really simple. The Quinzee is fun to play around in. I built these forts, the Quinzees, before I even knew they had a name. We dig out snowbanks and dig tunnels, and then when we didn't have big snowbanks to dig out, we made piles of snow, and then we figured out that we could dig those out too. So that's the basic premise. It's like an egg, hollowed out egg, and it works on the same principle as an igloo. Once you haul snow out, the structure stays as long as you let it sit for an hour or so. Longer, it hardens up, and over time it gets even harder to the point where you can walk on it. If you get a few warm weather days where it gets warm and then it freezes again, it'll turn to ice and you can step on top of it, as long as you don't make the walls too thin. So the only thing you have to watch out for is when you're digging to make sure you don't go through. You just watch for daylight, and then once you see daylight, then stop, so you won't go all the way through. So what do you think? It's a good structure. Would you sleep in it?
Maybe, if I had to.
If you had to. So anyway, there you go. You can sleep in the Quinzee if you have to.